For almost 1,000 years, humanity's heroic explorers have taken to the stars in search of the undiscovered country, driven on by that same primordial urge that filled our distant ancestors as they forged the first tentative path into the heavens, and there resolved to build a new home for humanity. The earliest attempts at spaceflight, full of raw spirit and untempered fire, stretched but did not break the chains that bound humankind to old Earth. As science and technology improved, so too did the means by which our forebears ascended on the hard climb to orbit. Yet, beyond the safe vicinity of the ancestral world, loomed the vastness of space, the sheer, unfathomable distance, barring all but the most determined efforts to go beyond. It would take the genius and vision of Childress and Roberts, and their invention of the quantum core engine to finally break the people of Earth free from its eternal hold. I am Maximillion Striker, and this is the history of spaceflight. As the 21st century waned, humanity was, perhaps, more vulnerable than it had ever been. For 200 years, Earth had endured an age of war, the technological awakening, and an explosion of industrialization that, for all the progress it brought, threatened the very ecosystem upon which humanity depended. Nation-states that had dominated the social order for millennia were coming apart as one catastrophe after another rocked the very foundations of the world. High above, yet another revolution was underway. The successful demonstration of RSI's quantum core engine in 2075 shone a light of hope into a weary world. In the months that followed, Roberts and Childress would become household names, as everyone from the greatest leaders of the day to the humblest schoolchild was entranced by images of the Navy ship powered by RSI's engine touring the planets and moons of the inner Sol system. Roberts, a lifelong believer in the starfaring destiny for humanity, would rally the people of Earth to the cause of space exploration like it had never been before. It was an optimistic vision of a technological triumph that the people of Earth badly needed. The leaders of the disparate nations of the world, eager to distract and placate the masses, commissioned quantum drive-equipped exploration ships to probe the mysteries of the Sol system. A host of expeditions to Mars, Venus, and beyond were launched. Undertakings that previously would have required years and vast financial commitment, with a quantum engine ship, were no more costly or time-consuming than the previous century's scientific missions to map Earth's icy southern pole. Yet, the vast, untamed expanse that awaited those early pioneers presented far more dangers and challenges than any terrestrial polar region. From sun-grazing dives to survey the blazing surface of Mercury, to frigid encounters with volatile comets and extrasolar icy bodies in the cold depths, the exploits of those first explorers of the pristine solar system are legendary. In my new Moby Reads book, On a Bulkhead and a Prayer, I chart some of the incredible stories of the brave souls who crewed what were still incredibly primitive vessels. Far from the safety and security of Earth, their exploits and ingenuity forged the path that others would follow. It was a time of heroic exploration and daring adventure as the nations of the day competed to be the first to touch new land, to discover new wonders, and, of course, to map and lay dubious claim to new resources. Stories and vids from heroes in the depths of space buoyed the spirits of an increasingly beleaguered population on Earth. But for most, spaceflight remained a distant dream, available only to a privileged few. With so much demand from nation-states and megacorporations for RSI's engines, almost overnight the company would become one of the most profitable that Earth had ever seen. RSI had unlocked the door to the solar system, but the catalyst that would throw it open and drive the future of spaceflight forward came not from another world, but from the increasingly desperate situation on Earth. With the climate growing ever more hostile and pressures of overpopulation straining resources to breaking point, Earth was reaching the limit of its ability to sustain life. Perhaps Roberts saw this looming disaster as a ticking time bomb. The very real possibility of Earth's ecosystem collapsing would mean the end of humanity unless a new home able to nurture and sustain them could be found, or perhaps made. The nascent lunar colony, while impressive, was unlikely to ever be truly self-sustaining. Roberts appears to have become increasingly convinced that the only answer was to terraform Mars. Perhaps only the man who promised to deliver the stars, and succeeded, could have believed such an ambitious project was even feasible. Roberts went on to create the RSI Terraforming Initiative, a truly massive undertaking that would become Roberts's singular obsession, into which he poured ever larger amounts of the company's resources. Despite his advancing age, he would head the initiative personally, and went on to dedicate the remaining years of his life to the project. Yet, even with the vast resources brought to bear, terraforming another world would remain tantalizingly out of reach, as finally, in 2108, Roberts succumbed to age. Legend has it that he was found at his desk, a simulation of an atmospheric processing plant running on his personal terminal, labelled Project Renatus. Whether true or not, one of Roberts's most enduring legacies would, indeed, be the Terraforming Initiative. He directed in his will that the company he founded should put every effort into the continuation of the project. And so it did. As the 22nd century gathered pace, more and more ships, nations, and mega-corporations were joining the rush to explore and exploit the system. With such enormous wealth waiting to be uncovered, tensions began to rise, and in the darkness of deep space, blood inevitably would be spilled. The Red Diaspora had begun. Coined by historian Dr. Kailani Bowden, the Red Diaspora, like the Wild West of old Earth's North American colonial period, is a term synonymous with lawless, rampant expansion and exploitation, but also with the romantic ideal of freedom from authority and boundless opportunity. Bowden argues that although many believed the great spreading of humanity into the Sol system was driven by the desire to claim the then red planet of Mars, competition was in fact greatest among the broken, lonely asteroids that lay in the Herschel belt between Mars and the gas giant Jupiter. It was there that blood was spilled first and most frequently. In the cold mid-regions of the Sol system, a new age was being born. Fortunes were literally just floating, waiting to be harvested. The urgency of action and potential for reward completely overwhelmed any attempts from the distant nations of Earth to govern this new frontier. And where there is lawlessness, there are outlaws. Rogue miners, sabotage gangs, and even pirates all plied their trade, operating sometimes openly, but more often in secret for nations or corporations seeking to gain an upper hand for themselves. In the rush for riches, the need to arm yourself and your ship when operating in the black was ingrained early for humanity's space pioneers. While something akin to a minor, undeclared war was raging over the asteroid belt, on Mars, scouting missions were growing in number and scope. A race was on to claim the then barren world's resources. Yet the challenges of Mars's gravity well and barren, hostile surface slowed progress and complicated extraction. What was needed was a proper colony, but disagreement over claims and costs, not to mention supplying such an endeavour, paralysed the nations of the day. The stalemate would finally be broken in 2113, when RSI announced that the Roberts Memorial Terraforming Initiative had patented a fully functional atmospheric processing plant that was, in theory, capable of generating a breathable atmosphere on Mars. It was an announcement that would shock the leaders of Earth and galvanize the world into action. A new global organization was established, bringing together a consortium of private industries and nearly every nation-state on Earth with the single goal of terraforming Mars and establishing there a new home for humankind. Just 7 years later, in 2120, the first landing occurred at what would become Mars's first city, and it was named Port Renitus. Atmospheric processing would begin within a year, and as the colony rapidly grew, progress seemed to be being made at an astonishing pace. Almost unbelievably, within just 5 years, the area around Port Renitus was on the verge of being declared atmospherically stable. The colony, now containing many thousands of souls, was so confident resident workers routinely ignored guidance to wear pressure suits and breathing apparatus, even boasting that breathing the thin, frigid air made them true Martians. Pride, as ever, comes before a fall, and on September the 13th, 2125, the Mars tragedy occurred. 4,876 people died of asphyxiation. It was a moment in time so momentous that the day is still marked annually by the UEE over 800 years after it occurred. Officially, the tragedy was blamed on a chemical failure in the air mix, which destabilized the atmosphere, leading to the failure of the containment fields meant to constrain it. The fatal collapse of atmospheric pressure that followed resulted in workers on the surface without pressure suits and in exposed parts of the colony losing their lives within moments. Later revelations lay blame squarely on the colony's AI system, which was said to have malfunctioned, opening air seals, locking emergency shelters, and even altering the atmospheric mix in the first place. An apparently deliberate act that would be oft cited by opponents of AI technology in the years to come. The Mars tragedy, however, would not dissuade human efforts at space exploration and terraforming. Far from it. In the wake of the tragedy, humanity would redouble its efforts in space and on Mars. Perhaps seeing such a large loss of life from a failing biosphere was a timely reminder of the fragility of a species bound to a single world. The transport needs of this renewed effort to rebuild Mars and expanding activity across the Sol system was increasingly outpacing the lumbering machinery of officialdom that still controlled the majority of the quantum-capable ships available. At the time, most launch systems remained distinct from the large and expensive quantum drive-equipped ships that plied the emerging spaceways. Passengers and freight would fly commercially to orbital stations via spaceplanes and then be transferred onto national or corporate quantum engine ships for onward travel. It was expensive, centrally controlled, and inefficient. With the Mars project starting to stall, a new, better, and cheaper means of travelling from Earth to the burgeoning destinations beyond was needed. Once again, it would be RSI who would answer the challenge of the age, this time with Project Zeus. Zeus was to be the first true civilian spaceship, far smaller and cheaper than any previous quantum drive-equipped ship, and crucially available for the first time to regular private organizations and individuals. Designed to be a single end-to-end transport craft for goods and personnel directly from the surface of Earth to the surface of Mars. It was envisaged to be capable of launching from an Earth spaceport into orbit and then quantum travelling as far as the asteroid belt and back. Capabilities that would once again push the technology of the day to its very limit. The now legendary Astro Development Team at RSI would bring in the very best technicians, scientists, and engineers the company had, miniaturizing and simplifying a quantum core engine, navigation system, high-energy power core, and deep space life support systems, and then somehow packing them into a spaceplane small enough to operate privately was, in its way, an even greater challenge than terraforming, or indeed the creation of the original quantum core engine itself. Throughout its development, Zeus was plagued with delays, cost overruns, and failures. It is often said, somewhat disparagingly of RSI's early history, that the company was forever reinventing the wheel. But what is often missed is how many of their great early advances were only possible due to their belief that they could do it better. If a solution existed but would require a compromise, it was discarded in favour of solving the problem themselves. The Zeus is the ultimate expression of that philosophy. So many systems were being re-engineered from the ground up that many people of the day believed that they could not possibly succeed. Undeterred, RSI pressed ahead, and in 2136, a prototype was finally ready for flight testing. Problems, however, continued, as the new thruster designs required a shallower ascent, and maintaining the craft's hull integrity during the high speeds achieved through the upper atmosphere proved extraordinarily challenging. Tragically, the test campaign would end abruptly on the 23rd of June, when the experimental craft was ripped apart by aerodynamic stresses as it left the atmosphere, destroying the ship and killing the test pilot. Worse still, for RSI, the entire event was broadcast live. It was a blow that would shake the corporation to its very foundations. With the project suspended and RSI's reputation hanging in the balance, the board turned to renowned Navy test pilot Michel Solano to bring the project back from the brink. Solano was a veteran of the quantum engine test program at RSI and the first person to quantum past Jupiter. Famous for being a steely-eyed pilot, accomplished engineer, and a straight talker, she was scathing in her criticism of the design failures and oversights that led to the lost ship. She would immerse herself in the design and engineering of the Zeus, battling RSI executives over cost and material limits, until ultimately forcing a complete overhaul of the Zeus's outer hull protection and flight control systems. Many believe that Solano's passion and enthusiasm for the Zeus project ultimately saved it from being cancelled, and that while RSI may have built the Zeus, it was Solano who made it. On the 19th of March 2137, Solano test flew a modified Zeus prototype to orbit and back, touching down safely to a hero's welcome. With the atmospheric and orbital insertion systems proven, the testing campaign moved on to putting the miniaturized Mark IX quantum core engine through its paces. And finally, 3 years later, in 2140, the first commercially available spaceships rolled off the production line. For the first time in human history, a private citizen could buy a vehicle that would carry them to another world. The Mark I Zeus was an enormous success, with companies and wealthy individuals buying them as fast as RSI could build them. Thousands of private citizens would take to the vast reaches of space, causing an explosion of enterprise and competition that fueled a new boom in exploration. On Mars, more robust and secure terraforming processes were nearing completion, and the opportunities and open space attracted a massive influx of visitors and migrants seeking a fresh start on a new world. And most were brought in by a Zeus. On the 18th of March 2157, Mars was declared officially habitable. Later that same evening, as the people of Mars celebrated, Kina Okon would go into labour. The next day, the first human born on another world would take her first breath of fresh Martian air. Air brought into existence by the towering achievements of generations of pioneers and the singular vision of just one man. But as monumental of an achievement as the terraforming of Mars was, in many ways it is the secondary achievement of the age. For thanks to the pioneers and entrepreneurs braving the distant reaches of the Sol system, humanity wasn't merely becoming a multiplanetary species, but a true spacefaring species. The inner system was now awash with industry and activity. The large state and corporate ships had to turn their attention to the relatively untapped expanse of the outer system, as a wave of smaller, nimbler Zeus owners flooded out from Earth. As the 22nd century wore on, more and more people would make a life for themselves off-world. Earth's overpopulation and environmental problems finally began to ease, and the abundance of resources flooding in fueled the longest continuous economic boom in Earth history. Humanity must have felt like they could accomplish almost anything. But as far as the people of Earth had come, they could barely have guessed at the scale of the unimaginable vastness that yet awaited them. As the 22nd century drew to a close, far from home, in the cold depths of the outer solar system, somewhere beyond the frigid orbit of Pluto, an unlicensed corporate exploration ship, the Cyclops, sent out a single coded distress message. Garbled and cut short, only 2 words were ever deciphered amongst the blaring sirens and panicked screams: anomaly and quantum. The fate of the Cyclops was never discovered, but as humanity pushed ever outward, eyes set on distant stars, it would not be the last ship to vanish mysteriously in the icy dark.